Sophia Wilder pressed her raw knuckles to the iron door knocker and knocked until her hand bled. She had walked 7 miles in the Virginia heat, her dress torn at the hem, her boots splitting at the sole. Her father was 3 weeks dead and in an unmarked grave. She had no money, no family name worth carrying, no future she could see from where she stood. All she had was this door, and the desperate, furious hope that the man behind it wouldn't turn her away, the way every other door in Millhaven already had. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very end, because what happens inside Blackwood Manor is going to stay with you. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The door didn't open right away. Sophia knocked again. Harder. The split across her knuckle reopened, and she felt the sting of it, but didn't pull her hand back. Pain had been her constant companion for 3 weeks now. Since the morning she found her father slumped over the kitchen table, cold as the ceramic mug still wrapped in his hand. Pain was familiar territory. What she couldn't afford was to let it show. She heard footsteps from somewhere inside. Slow, deliberate ones. The kind that said whoever was walking toward her wanted her to understand they were in no hurry. The door swung open. A tall man stood in the frame. Dark coat, dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, though he couldn't have been older than 40. His jaw was set hard. His eyes were gray, not blue-gray, not warm gray. The gray of a sky that has made up its mind about something. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he hasn't decided how to solve yet. He didn't say a word. Sophia straightened her spine. "My name is Sophia Wilder," she said. "My father was George Wilder. He managed the tobacco accounts for Senator Hartwell for 11 years. I'm educated. I can keep ledgers, manage staff, run a household, and teach if need be. I'm asking for work, sir. Any kind of honest work you have." The man looked at her for a long moment. "You're bleeding," he said. She glanced at her knuckle. "I know. You walked here?" "Yes." "From town?" "From wherever I could reach town from." She kept her voice flat and even. "Yes." He tilted his head, just slightly. "What happened to your boots?" "They wore out." She met his eyes without blinking. "I'm not here about my boots, Mr. Blackwood." Something moved across his expression. Not quite surprise, not quite respect. Something between them. He stepped back from the door. "Come in, Miss Wilder." She had heard about Blackwood Manor her whole life. Everyone in Millhaven had. The estate sat on 400 acres of Virginia land, and the man who owned it had been the subject of more hushed conversation than she could count. Mad Earl, some people called him. Not to his face. Never to his face. But behind his back at the dry goods store, at Sunday services, over back fences. The name followed Charles Blackwood like a shadow he'd long since stopped trying to outrun. She'd never paid that kind of gossip much mind before. She was paying it mind now. He led her into a sparse room off the main hall. A desk, 2 chairs, a window with afternoon light pressing through it. He sat, she stood. He looked at her. "How long has your father been dead?" he asked. The bluntness of it landed square. 3 weeks. "And before you came here, how many other doors did you try?" She didn't answer immediately. "Miss Wilder." 11, she said. 11 doors in Millhaven, 2 in Hartsfield. 13 doors, he repeated. "Yes, and every one of them turned you away." "Every one." She kept her hands still at her sides. "My father had debts I didn't know existed. When he died, those debts became public knowledge overnight. The name Wilder became something people didn't want associated with their households. What kind of debts? Gambling, she said, and it cost her something to say it. Cards, mostly. Over several years. He was careful about hiding it. From me, from everyone. He was very careful. She paused. He wasn't careful enough. Charles Blackwood studied her. George Wilder worked directly under Hartwell. Yes, sir. And Hartwell himself. Did he turn you away? Senator Hartwell wasn't home when I called. She held his gaze. His wife was. She handed me 2 weeks' wages and told me the household was fully staffed. A beat. It wasn't. A silence settled over the room. Outside, the Virginia summer buzzed and hummed with heat. Somewhere far off on the property, she could hear someone working. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal. "You're not frightened," he said. "I can't afford to be frightened, Mr. Blackwood. Most people are when they come here. Most people have more options than I do." She tilted her chin. "Do you have work for me or not?" He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Not defensively, but with the settled patience of a man who had already made a decision and was now simply deciding how to say it. "Miss Wilder," he said, "I do have a need in this household, but it is not the kind of need you're expecting." Sophia's hands tightened slightly. "Then tell me what it is." He was quiet for a moment that stretched too long. "My father's estate," he said carefully, "was left to me under specific conditions. This land, this house, the holdings, all of it contingent on terms laid out in his will. One of those terms requires that I be legally married before my 39th birthday." The clock on the wall ticked. "My birthday," Charles Blackwood said, "is 6 weeks from today." Outside, a bird called once and fell silent. Sophia stared at him. "You're not offering me employment," she said slowly. "I'm offering you security." His voice didn't waver. "A home. Legal protection from your father's creditors. The Blackwood name. And whatever people in this county say about me, that name carries enough weight to settle every debt attached to yours." "You're offering me marriage." "I'm offering you a practical arrangement." Sophia stood up. Not from anger, or not only from anger. She stood because she needed her feet under her for this. Because sitting felt too much like agreeing to something she hadn't yet decided about. "You don't know me," she said. "I know what I need to know." He didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "You're educated. You're not a coward. You have more composure standing in front of a stranger than most people I've encountered in the last 3 years. You walked 7 miles in July heat on boots held together by stubbornness alone, and you stood straight when I opened that door." He looked at her steadily. "Those are the qualities this arrangement requires." "That is not a proposal, Mr. Blackwood." "No," he said. "It is not. I'm not pretending it's anything other than what it is. A business arrangement between two people who need something from each other." "And what exactly do you need from me, beyond a signature on a marriage document?" "You would manage this household. I have 6 staff members, capable people, but without direction, since my housekeeper's authority was recently reduced. You would attend social functions with me when required. There are 3 in the next 2 months I cannot avoid. You would be treated with full courtesy and given complete authority over domestic matters." He paused. "I would not make demands of you beyond what you agreed to tonight." The delicate weight of what he left unsaid settled between them like a held breath. Sophia looked at this man, this hard-jawed, gray-eyed, perfectly composed man, and tried to read something true in him. Tried to find the thing underneath the calculation. She didn't know if she could trust what she found, but she knew, with absolute and terrible clarity, what was waiting for her if she walked back out that door. "What happened to your wife?" she asked. Something shifted in his face. Not much. Just enough to tell her she'd touched something real. "She died of fever," he said. 3 years ago. It was fast. It was brutal. It is remarkable," he added, and his voice went quieter, flatter, like a door pulling closed. "How many extraordinary stories people have constructed around what was a completely ordinary death." "I'm sorry," Sophia said. "Don't be." The door was fully closed now. "I didn't tell you for sympathy. I told you because you asked, and you deserve a straight answer." He looked at her. "Most people don't ask. They just repeat whatever they heard in town. I'm not most people." "No," he said. "I don't believe you are." Another silence, and in it, Sophia made her decision. "I want everything in writing," she said. "Whatever terms we agree to, written, signed, and witnessed." He nodded. "Of course. My own room. You'll have it. Full access to the household accounts." His eyes narrowed fractionally. Then, "Granted. And if this arrangement causes me harm, physical, financial, or otherwise, I want a legal means to dissolve it and walk away without consequence." Charles Blackwood was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even. "You think quickly," he said. "I think quickly when the situation requires it." She met his gaze. "Do you agree to those terms, Mr. Blackwood?" He stood, taller than she'd registered when he was seated. He crossed to the desk drawer, drew out a sheet of paper and a pen, and set both on the desktop between them. "Write them down," he said. "Every one. I'll sign it tonight." Sophia stepped forward and picked up the pen. Her knuckle was still bleeding, faintly. A small red mark transferred to the corner of the paper as she gripped it. She wrote, anyway. Mrs. Aldridge received the news at supper. She was a stout, capable woman of 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight, and the kind of face that had seen everything life had to offer and rendered a firm opinion on most of it. Charles told her plainly, in the hall, without preamble. Miss Wilder would be staying. Miss Wilder would be his wife within the fortnight. Miss Wilder was to be given the East Wing room and every courtesy of the house. Mrs. Aldridge's expression did not change in any visible way. "You'll be wanting supper for 2 then," she said. "Yes." "And the East Wing linens changed?" "Yes." She looked at Sophia. "Miss Wilder," she said, "have you eaten today?" Sophia considered lying, decided against it. "No, ma'am." 1 millimeter of softness crossed the woman's face. "Come with me." She led Sophia to the kitchen and put cold ham and cornbread and a glass of buttermilk in front of her before Sophia had properly settled into the chair. "You're George Wilder's daughter," Mrs. Aldridge said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I knew your father. Not well. He came through here twice on business with Mr. Blackwood's father, years back." She paused, straightening something on the shelf that didn't need straightening. "He was a decent man." "He was," Sophia said. "He made some bad choices." "He did." Mrs. Aldridge turned and looked at her directly. "Most of this county has decided to hold you responsible for those choices." Sophia kept eating. "That appears to be the case. It isn't right." "No, ma'am, but it is what it is." The older woman was quiet a moment. Then she said, carefully, like each word was being placed rather than spoken. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't do things without reason. He doesn't act impulsively. He doesn't make decisions he hasn't thought through." She let that sit. "He is a difficult man to know. He is not an easy man to live with." Another pause. "But there is a difference between difficult and cruel, Miss Wilder. A great difference. And in my 14 years with this household, I have never seen him be cruel." Sophia looked up from her plate. "Why are you telling me this?" Mrs. Aldridge's expression was matter-of-fact as a hammer. "Because you look like a woman who needs to understand who she's made her arrangement with." She turned back to the counter. "Finish your supper." It was full dark by the time Sophia sat alone in the East Wing room. Her room, apparently, now, with the signed paper in her hands. Charles Blackwood's signature was exactly what she would have expected. Firm, even, no flourish. The signature of a man who didn't second-guess himself. She read her own terms back to herself. Her own handwriting. The words she'd written from sheer necessity, from 3 weeks of grief and humiliation, and the particular cold clarity that comes when you have run out of every option but one. It was strange to see desperation look so composed on paper. She thought about what Mrs. Aldridge had said. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when she picked up the pen. Not surprised, not impressed. Something quieter. Something she couldn't name yet. She thought about a woman who died of fever 3 years ago. Fast and brutal. And the man who had been saying completely ordinary about it for 3 years, like if he said it enough times, it would stop mattering the way it clearly still mattered. Sophia was not a romantic. She had been raised practical, trained practical, and the last 22 days had stripped the last of the softness from her in ways she was still discovering. She did not tell herself stories about fate or providence, or the strange mercy of finding the right door just in time. But she pressed her thumb against the folded edge of the paper, and she felt, for the first time and longer than she could account for, something that was not dread. She couldn't name that either. She thought she'd wait and see what it became. She was nearly asleep when she heard footsteps in the hall. Slow ones. Not approaching her door. Passing it. Going toward the far end of the corridor, toward whatever part of this house he occupied at the end of a day. They stopped. Then, from the other side of her door, his voice, low, with none of the careful precision she'd heard all evening. Just a man's voice, stripped down. "Miss Wilder." She sat up. "Yes?" A pause. "The terms you wrote," he said. "They were reasonable." She waited. "I want you to know that." Another pause, longer than the first. "I don't make a habit of. I am aware this is not a conventional situation. I am aware it asks something significant of you." His voice stayed level, but there was something moving underneath it, something that cost him a little to say. "I intend to keep my word." Sophia sat in the dark and thought about 11 slammed doors and 2 weeks' wages from a woman who lied about her staff count, and a boarding house with hard-eyed judgment and $2 running out fast. "I believe you, Mr. Blackwood," she said. Another pause. "Good night, Miss Wilder." "Good night." His footsteps moved on down the hall. Sophia lay back down. The Virginia night pressed warm and close against the window, all crickets and honeysuckle and the thick summer dark. Somewhere on this estate, her estate now, God help her, 400 acres breathed and settled under the same heat. She had walked 7 miles to get here. She had knocked until her hand bled. She had written her own terms of survival on a piece of paper and watched a stranger sign them without flinching. Sophia Wilder closed her eyes. She slept. Morning came without warning, the way it does in summer, sudden and hot and full of obligation. Sophia was dressed before the household woke. Old habit, her father used to say. The day belonged to whoever got to it first. And whatever his failings, George Wilder had raised a daughter who believed that. She found the kitchen empty, the fire already built, but Mrs. Aldridge not yet in. And she put the kettle on herself and stood at the counter eating the last of the cornbread from the night before, and thinking about the piece of paper folded in her dress pocket. She'd slept with it there. Not sentiment, sense. The only document that currently stood between her and complete ruin was not going to spend its first night in a house she didn't yet trust, inside a drawer she'd never opened. "You're up early." She turned. Charles Blackwood stood in the kitchen doorway. No coat, no cravat, just a plain linen shirt and dark trousers. His hair not yet ordered into the severe composure of the night before. He looked younger without the formality. Not softer, just younger. "So are you," she said. "I don't sleep much." He crossed to the shelf, took down a mug, and poured from the kettle she'd just boiled with the ease of a man who had been doing it himself for years. He didn't apologize for the interruption. He didn't make small talk. He stood 3 feet away and drank his coffee and looked at her with those level gray eyes. "Mrs. Aldridge will want to go over the household accounts with you today," he said, "if you're willing." "I said I could manage a household. I meant it." "I know you meant it." A pause. "That's not a test. I just want to know your preference." Sophia set down the cornbread. "My preference is to understand exactly what I've agreed to run before I agree to run it." Something almost moved at the corner of his mouth. "Then after breakfast." She looked at him. "Mr. Blackwood, there's something I need to say before this arrangement moves another step forward." He waited. "I will not pretend." She kept her voice even. "I will not perform contentment I don't feel, or gratitude that isn't real. I won't lie to you, and I won't lie to your staff. If I agree to something, I will honor it. If I don't agree, I will tell you so plainly." She held his gaze. "I need to know you understand that before I sign anything else." He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Wilder," he said, "that is, without question, the most relieving thing anyone has said to me in 3 years." She blinked. He drained his coffee and set down the mug. "I'll tell Aldridge after breakfast." He left the kitchen, and Sophia stood alone with the kettle still steaming, and the distinct, bewildering sensation that she had just surprised a man who was very rarely surprised. She wasn't certain yet whether that was a comfort or a warning. The accounts told a story, and the story was chaos. Not from negligence, from grief. Sophia could see it in the ledgers the moment Mrs. Aldridge laid them open on the library table. The household had been perfectly maintained until a date she could mark almost to the week. And then the entries had grown shorter, rougher. Some months skipped entirely. The careful hand of whoever had kept them before, replaced by Aldridge's own, more practical scratching. 3 years, Sophia said. Yes, Mrs. Aldridge stood at her shoulder. He managed what he could himself. The outdoor accounts, the farming operations, the tobacco, those are fine. Mr. Blackwood does those personally, and he's meticulous. The domestic side he left to me, and I do my best, but I am not trained for it the way I was trained for running a kitchen. Who kept these before? A pause. His wife, Mrs. Aldridge said. Sophia didn't look up from the ledger. She was good at it. She was exceptional. The housekeeper's voice held something careful in it. Catherine Blackwood had a mind like a surgeon, sharp and precise, and never wasted emotion. Another pause. It was a tremendous loss, on many levels. Sophia turned a page. I'm not her, she said. No one is asking you to be. Good. She pulled the inkpot closer. Then let's start from the beginning. They worked for 2 hours. Sophia asked questions Mrs. Aldridge hadn't been asked in years. Specific ones, about suppliers and contracts, and which debts were current, and which had been quietly set aside. The housekeeper answered with increasing frankness as the morning went on. And by the time Charles appeared in the library doorway at 11, the table was covered in Sophia's working notes, and a list of 3 immediate corrections she'd identified in the accounts. He looked at the table, then at her. "Already?" he said. "You're overpaying for flour by 40%, Sophia told him. "Greenwood's mill on the Southern Road has better prices, and their quality is the same. And the wood delivery contract hasn't been renegotiated in 7 years. That rate was set when lumber was scarce, and it isn't anymore." Charles stepped fully into the room. He looked at the notes. He looked at Mrs. Aldridge. The housekeeper gave the absolute smallest shrug of her shoulders that a human being could produce. "How long to implement the changes?" he asked Sophia. "A week for the flour, if you send someone to Greenwood's today. The lumber contract needs a letter, which I can draft this afternoon if you want." She paused. "There's also a third thing." "Say it." "Your East Tenant cottage, the one on the far corner of the North Field. It's been listed as vacant for 2 years. It's not vacant. Someone's been paying reduced rent without a formal lease, and the money has been going into a separate account I don't recognize." The room went absolutely still. Mrs. Aldridge had gone perfectly stiff beside her. Sophia kept her eyes on Charles. He was looking at the ledger. His jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen since the night before. Not anger, exactly. Something more controlled than anger. "That account," he said quietly, "is mine." Sophia waited. "The occupant of that cottage is a woman named Ruth Daly. She was my wife's maid for 9 years. When Catherine died, I had no grounds to keep her on officially, and she had no family to return to. I reduced her rent to what she could afford, and I kept it off the main books to avoid questions I didn't want to answer." His voice didn't rise, didn't soften. He looked straight at Sophia. It was not dishonest. It was private. The silence stretched. Sophia looked at the ledger, looked at him. "I'll mark it," she said simply. "A personal account, not household business. That closes the discrepancy." He looked at her steadily. "Thank you," he said, like the words weren't his most natural habit, but he was choosing them deliberately. Mrs. Aldridge breathed again. The marriage was set for a Wednesday, 3 weeks out. Not in the church in Millhaven. Neither of them suggested it, and neither of them had to explain why. A justice of the peace would come to the property. There would be no celebration. 2 witnesses from the household staff. The paperwork filed with the county the same afternoon. Word got out before the week was over. Sophia found out it had gotten out the way she found out most things now, by paying attention to the quality of silence in the rooms around her. Mrs. Aldridge went a shade quieter than usual on Thursday. 2 of the younger staff girls stopped talking when she walked through the kitchen. On Friday, riding into Millhaven with Charles to collect a contract from the solicitor's office, she counted 4 people who watched them pass from the boardwalk and turned to speak to the person next to them before they were even out of earshot. She kept her spine straight and her chin level and said nothing. Charles said nothing either. It was not until they were inside the solicitor's office, a thin man named Pemberton, who did an admirable job of hiding the fact that his eyes were trying to assess everything about her at once, that anyone spoke to the situation directly. "A word privately, Mr. Blackwood," Pemberton said, with a glance toward Sophia. "Miss Wilder stays," Charles said. Pemberton blinked, adjusted, proceeded. "The county clerk has raised a flag on the filing," he said carefully. "The will's terms are straightforward enough, but there's been some informal inquiry. From your cousin, Mr. Blackwood." Charles went very still. "What kind of inquiry?" "Mr. Harlan Blackwood he's engaged a solicitor of his own. Pemberton set a paper on the desk, and his fingers moved away from it quickly, like it had a temperature. He's indicated his intention to challenge the validity of a marriage contracted within 6 weeks of the deadline. His position is that such a marriage would constitute a marriage of convenience rather than a legitimate union, and would therefore not satisfy the terms of the will. Sophia looked at Charles. His face was made of stone. "On what legal basis?" she asked. Both men turned to her. She looked at Pemberton directly. "The will specifies marriage. It does not specify the circumstances of that marriage or the duration preceding it. Or does it?" Pemberton opened the will document. He read. He read again. "It specifies," he said slowly, "legal marriage, performed within the county, witnessed, filed." "Then the challenge has no standing." Sophia kept her voice level. "The terms are met, or they're not. Anything beyond the legal criteria is personal opinion, not contractual condition." She paused. "Unless your cousin would like to argue to a judge that his interpretation of his father's intentions supersedes the actual language of the document." Pemberton was staring at her. Charles was staring at her. "That is," Pemberton said carefully, "essentially accurate." "Then file it," she said, "and if Harlan Blackwood wants to bring a challenge, let him bring it in front of a judge who can read." Silence. Then Charles turned to Pemberton. "File it." Pemberton filed it. They were back in the street 2 minutes later, the summer heat pressing down on the boardwalk like a hand. Sophia was walking ahead when Charles's hand caught her elbow. Not rough, just present. "Miss Wilder." She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she still didn't have a name for. It had appeared at the kitchen that morning with the coffee, and again in the library with the ledger, and it was back now, fuller than either of those times. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "You brought me along," she told him. "I assumed it wasn't to look at the walls." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely, just slightly, the way ice cracks before it breaks. "No," he said. "It wasn't." She waited, because there was something else under the words, and she could feel it. "Harlan," he said finally, and even the single name cost him something. "He has been waiting 4 years for this estate. He will not stop at one inquiry." "I know. He will come after you personally. He will go through your family's history, your father's debts, every door that turned you away in this county. He will make it very public and very ugly." She met his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, I have already been through very public and very ugly. I walked out the other side of it on split boots and an empty stomach. Harlan Blackwood's legal maneuvers are not going to frighten me into going anywhere." She held his gaze a beat longer. "Are we done here?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said quietly. "We're done here." She met Ruth daily on a Saturday. The woman came to the main house herself, small, weathered, somewhere in her mid-40s, with the kind of face that had been pretty once and was now something better, honest. She knocked at the back door, and Mrs. Aldridge brought her to the sitting room, and they sat across from each other while the afternoon shifted on the walls. "I wanted to meet you myself," Ruth said, "before the wedding, before it was all decided." "I'm glad you did," Sophia said. Ruth studied her with directness that reminded Sophia somewhat of looking in a mirror. "You know who I am." "Yes." "Then you know I knew Catherine Blackwood better than almost anyone in this household." Sophia waited. "She was not what people say," Ruth told her plainly. "She was not soft. She was not delicate. She was brilliant and strong-willed, and she and Mr. Blackwood used to argue about everything from the tobacco yield to the dinner table arrangements, and neither one of them ever conceded an inch unless the other had actually earned it. Something moved across her face. When she got sick, it happened in 3 weeks. 3 weeks from the first fever to the end. And the man I watched sit beside her, there was nothing mad about it. There was just loss. The kind that doesn't have a shape. She stopped. Sophia felt the back of her throat tighten. "I'm telling you this," Ruth said, "because someone should. Because in this county everyone has told the story they wanted, and nobody told the true one." She folded her hands in her lap. "He is not easy, but he is real. There's a difference, and it matters." Sophia thought about the kitchen that morning. The man without a coat or a cravat, making his own coffee, looking at her straight. "It matters," she agreed quietly. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected."
What did you expect? Someone more desperate,
Ruth said honestly. "Someone who'd taken the first exit and didn't look at the door first." Sophia held her gaze. "I looked at every door." Something settled in Ruth's expression. Not approval exactly. Recognition. "Then you'll do," she said. 3 days before the wedding, Harlan Blackwood came to the estate himself. Sophia was in the east wing with Mrs. Aldridge when she heard the raised voice in the front hall. Not Charles's voice. Another one. Louder, angrier, with the particular edge of a man performing outrage rather than feeling it. She went to the top of the stairs and listened. "You are making a decision you cannot undo," Harlan was saying. "For a woman you have known for 3 weeks, a woman with no name worth keeping, whose father died in debt and disgrace. That's enough." Charles's voice was quiet. That was what made it dangerous. "I am your family, Charles. I am your blood. I have been patient. I have waited. I have respected your grief. And now you are throwing the estate away on a desperate girl you hired off the street." "She is not hired." Still quiet. Absolutely flat. "And she is not a girl. And you have 10 seconds to lower your voice in my house." A pause. "You don't know anything about her," Harlan said, but the edge had changed. "I know what I need to know." A beat. "She is going to be my wife. She is going to manage this household. She is going to have every protection of the Blackwood name. And you are going to conduct yourself accordingly, Harlan, or you are going to conduct yourself somewhere else." Sophia pressed her back against the wall, out of sight. She heard the front door. She heard one set of footsteps walking away, sharp and hard across the floorboards. She heard another set, slower, stopping at the foot of the stairs. She waited. Charles didn't call up to her, didn't say anything. He just stood there for a moment. She could feel it, somehow, through the walls and the quiet. And then his footsteps moved away, toward the study. Mrs. Aldridge appeared at her elbow, silent as a ghost. "I heard," Sophia said before the housekeeper could speak. "You should know," Mrs. Aldridge said quietly. "That is the first time in 3 years he has raised his voice to anyone in defense of anyone other than his staff." Sophia absorbed that. She looked down at her hands, steady at her sides, the way she'd learned to hold them. "Mrs. Aldridge," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm going to need to speak to him. He's in the study." "I know." She started toward the stairs. "I know he is." The study door was closed, but not latched, and Sophia knocked twice and pushed it open without waiting for an answer. Charles was standing at the window with his back to her. He didn't turn around. "I don't need," he started. "I know what you need, and don't need less than you do," she said. I'm not here to check on you." That stopped him. He turned. She crossed the room and stopped 3 feet from him and looked at him straight. "I heard what he said." Sophia. It was the first time he'd used her given name. They both registered it at the same moment. Something shifted in the air between them, quick and quiet, like a door opening in a room that had been sealed. He didn't correct himself. She didn't comment on it. "You shouldn't have had to defend me to him," she said. "Not like that." "I didn't do it for obligation." His voice was measured, but underneath it something was moving, working its way toward the surface. "I did it because what he said was wrong." "He said things that are technically accurate." She held his gaze. "My father died in debt. My name is damaged. I came here out of desperation. None of that is false." "None of that is the point." "Then what is the point, Mr. Blackwood?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "A person is not the sum of what's been done to them, or what's been said about them." His eyes were steady on hers. "You have conducted yourself in this house with more dignity than most people manage when everything is going their way. That is the point." Sophia felt something press against the inside of her chest. Not quite pain, not quite warmth. Something that didn't have a clean name yet. "Your cousin is not going to stop," she said. "No. He's going to look for something he can use. Against the marriage, against me, against the filing." "Yes." "Then we need to be ready for that." She crossed to the desk and pulled out the chair and sat down. Not in the guest chair, in his chair, behind his desk. The way a person sits when they mean to work. "Tell me everything about the will. Not the summary, the actual language. Every clause." Charles stared at her. "Sit down," she said. He sat down, in the guest chair, across from her, which was so absurd and so exactly right that something almost moved through his expression before he locked it back down. He told her about the will. It took an hour. She asked questions, and he answered them, and she wrote down what mattered and crossed out what didn't, and by the time the afternoon light had shifted fully across the room, she had a clearer picture of what Harlan Blackwood was actually after and what tools he had to get it. The picture was not comfortable. "The language is vague in one place," she said, tapping the notes. "Here. A marriage of genuine establishment and good standing. That phrase. That's where he's going to dig." Charles leaned forward. "What does he need to prove it isn't?" "He doesn't need to prove anything to start a challenge. He just needs to raise enough public doubt that the judge is predisposed before he even reads the documents." She looked up. "Who is the circuit judge?" "Alderman Hayes." "Does Hayes know Harlan?" A pause. "They have hunted together." Sophia absorbed that quietly. "Of course they have." She set down her pen. "Then we don't fight this in court first. We fight it in the county first. Perception, reputation, how people in this community read this marriage before it ever gets in front of a judge." Charles frowned. "We're not performing a marriage, Sophia." "No," she said. "We're demonstrating one. There's a difference." She looked at him directly. "The Hartwell event. The one you said you couldn't avoid this month. When is it?" 2 weeks from Saturday. "We go. Together. We don't hide. We don't arrive separately. We don't behave like two people with something to apologize for." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Can you?" She thought about Senator Hartwell's wife, handing over 2 weeks' wages with an expression of clean, unmistakable pity. She thought about 13 doors. She thought about walking into a room full of people who had already decided what they thought of her, and holding her head up anyway. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." Something passed between them, brief, wordless, the particular recognition of two people who have both survived something and can see it in each other. Then Charles said, quietly, "There's something else you should know." She waited. He looked at his hands. "Harlan was in line for this estate before I was. My father changed the will when I was 19, after a series of decisions Harlan made that my father considered disqualifying. He was choosing words with the care of a man moving through uncertain footing. Harlan has never forgiven that. He has spent 20 years waiting for me to fail the terms, and when Catherine died, he was almost—" He stopped, started again. "He came to the funeral. He stood at the grave, and I watched him calculate." Sophia said nothing. "That is the man you are dealing with," Charles said. "I needed you to understand that completely." She looked at him, this hard, private, carefully composed man who had just told her something true about his oldest wound, without any of the careful distance he usually kept around every sentence. She understood what it had cost him. Not money, not pride. Something more essential than either. "I understand," she said. He nodded once, stood, crossed back to the window. "Wednesday," he said. 3 more days." 3 more days, she agreed, and gathered her notes, and left him to the window and whatever he was working through on the other side of it. The wedding happened on a Wednesday morning at 9:30. The justice of the peace was a round, brisk man named Fulton, who performed the ceremony with the efficient warmth of someone who had done it many times and still considered it worth doing properly. Mrs. Aldridge stood witness on one side. Thomas, the head groundsman, a large, quiet man who had worked the Blackwood land for 20 years, stood on the other. It was brief. Charles said the words in a clear, even voice. Sophia said hers, and meant every one, because she was not capable of saying words she didn't mean. And what she meant was this: "I am here. I am real. I intend to honor this." When Fulton said the thing about the ring, there was a half-beat of silence. They hadn't arranged for one, hadn't thought of it. And then Charles reached into his coat pocket and produced a plain gold band that he placed on her finger without ceremony. She looked at it, looked at him. He said nothing, but his hand didn't move away immediately, and she felt the warmth of his fingers around hers for 3 full seconds before he released her. Fulton signed the documents. Thomas signed. Mrs. Aldridge signed with a firm, practiced hand, and the expression of a woman who had decided something privately and would keep her own counsel about it. Sophia Wilder was Sophia Blackwood before the church bells in Millhaven struck 10. The first thing that happened was a letter from Harlan, delivered that same afternoon. Charles read it at the desk and didn't say what was in it, and when Sophia held out her hand, he looked at her for a moment and then passed it across without argument. She read it standing. It was short, legal in tone, and informed Charles that Harlan Blackwood, through his representative, would be filing a formal challenge to the will's execution on the grounds of fraudulent satisfaction of conditions. The challenge cited the timeline, the lack of prior relationship, and, here Sophia's jaw tightened, a claim that one of the parties had entered the marriage under financial duress, rendering genuine consent questionable. She set the letter down. "He's arguing I was coerced," she said. "Yes." "That I was desperate enough that I couldn't meaningfully consent." "That is his position." Sophia looked at the letter. She felt something move through her. Not fear, not quite anger, something cleaner and colder than either. "I wrote my own terms," she said. "I dictated the conditions of this arrangement. I named every protection I required, and you agreed to them." She looked up. "That is not the behavior of a coerced woman. That is the behavior of a woman negotiating." "I know that." His voice was quiet. "A judge who wants to rule against us will not care about the distinction." "Then we make him care." She picked up her pen. "We start with the document I wrote, the one you signed. Every term, every protection I demanded. It establishes agency. It establishes that I came to this with conditions, and they were honored." She was already writing. "I need you to write a statement too, about how the proposal came about, what you offered, what I asked for, how it was agreed." "Sophia." His voice had shifted. She looked up. He was watching her with that expression again, the one she still hadn't fully named, the one that had been appearing and deepening since the kitchen on the second morning. "You are fighting harder for this marriage than most people fight for things they chose freely." "I did choose freely," she said. "That's exactly the point." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said softly. "It is." They went to the Hartwell event on a Saturday. The gathering was held at the Hartwell estate, exactly the kind of Virginia summer social occasion that moved slowly through multiple rooms and numerous conversations, and gave everyone present ample opportunity to see everything and say everything behind everyone's back. There were 30-odd people. Sophia knew some of them. Some of them knew her. She wore a gray dress because it was what she had that was presentable, and she had not pretended otherwise to Charles, and he had not suggested otherwise to her. They arrived together in the Blackwood carriage, and he handed her down himself, and they walked in side by side. The silence that preceded their entry into the main room lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Mrs. Hartwell materialized from somewhere to the left, an impressive woman with perfect composure and the eyes of someone taking inventory, and extended both hands to Sophia with a warmth that was 50% genuine and 50% social calculation, and was still, on balance, welcome. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said. "How lovely." The name landed across Sophia's shoulders like something newly fitted. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said. "Thank you for having us." The evening moved. People approached, retreated, approached again, some with genuine curiosity, some with the careful courtesy of those revising an opinion, some with the stiff politeness of those who hadn't yet decided to revise it, but didn't want to be on the wrong side of it if the wind shifted. Sophia moved through all of it the way she'd moved through everything for the past month. Directly, calmly, without apology. Charles stayed close, not hovering, he never hovered, but present, always within a room's width, occasionally catching her eye across a crowd with a look that said he was paying attention. It was during the third hour, in the smaller sitting room off the main hall, that Senator Hartwell himself drew Charles aside with a hand on the arm and the specific expression of a man delivering news he doesn't enjoy delivering. Sophia watched from across the room. She watched Charles's face go still. She watched the senator lean in and say something low and quick. She watched Charles nod once, twice, the slow, controlled nods of a man absorbing something he wasn't warned about. Then the senator was gone, and Charles was standing alone, and Sophia crossed the room before she made the conscious decision to do it. "What happened?" she said. He looked at her. His voice came out flat. "Harlan is filed. It went through this afternoon. Hayes accepted it on the same day." She stared. "The same day? The challenge was only sent yesterday." Hayes was waiting for it. The flatness in his voice was iron over something much hotter. "Hartwell just told me because he heard from the county clerk. It's already filed. There will be a hearing." "When?" 6 weeks. Sophia breathed through her nose. Once, twice. The room buzzed around them with silk and conversation and warm summer air, and she stood in the middle of it and thought very fast. "Then we have 6 weeks," she said. "Sophia, 6 weeks to build a record. Witnesses, documentation, the household staff, Ruth Daly, every person in this county who has seen us conduct ourselves as a real household." She kept her voice low and even. "Harlan needs a judge to believe this was a fraud. We need the same judge to see clearly that it wasn't." She met his eyes. "Is that doable?" He was looking at her with something raw at the edges of his composure. "You are very calm. One of us needs to be." "You are very—" He stopped. Seemed to be sorting through words and discarding them until he found the right one. "You are remarkable," he said finally, like he'd surprised himself saying it. The word landed differently than she expected it to. She didn't know what to do with it, so she did what she always did. Kept moving forward. "I need to speak to Pemberton first thing Monday, and I need you to give me every letter Harlan has ever sent to this household. Every one, going back as far as you have them." "All right." "And Charles," she used his name deliberately, consciously, the same way he'd used hers 3 days ago. He registered it. "We are going to win this." He looked at her for a long moment in the buzzing summer room. "I know," he said, quiet, certain, like she'd handed him something he hadn't realized he'd stopped carrying, and he was just now feeling the weight of it back in his hands. "I know we are." She found him in the rose garden that night. She hadn't known there was a rose garden. The estate was large enough that she was still discovering its edges, but she had followed the path from the back of the house in the direction of the voices she thought she heard, which turned out to be nothing but the summer dark. And then she came around the low stone wall, and there he was. He was sitting on the bench at the garden's center, with his coat off and his head tilted back, not looking at the roses, just sitting. The way a person sits when they are not performing anything for anyone. He heard her and straightened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know this was here." "Don't apologize." He moved slightly on the bench, not quite making room, but acknowledging that room could be made. Sophia sat. The roses were white in the dark, barely visible, more fragrance than form. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird was doing its business. She could hear him breathing next to her, steady, slower than usual. "Catherine planted these," he said. "She didn't say anything. She planted them the second spring we were here, said the estate needed something that wasn't tobacco or timber." A pause. She was right. She was usually right about that kind of thing. His voice was doing the thing again. That quiet flatness that wasn't flat at all, that was covering something enormous with careful horizontal lines. "I had them pulled up after she died. Had the whole garden torn out. And then 2 months later, I had them replanted because—" He stopped. "Because you couldn't stand it without them," Sophia said. "Because I couldn't stand what I'd done without them." He turned to look at her. "There's a difference." She looked back at him. "She would have liked you," he said. That pressed against something behind her sternum. "You don't have to say that." "I don't say things I don't mean." His eyes were steady on hers. "She would have argued with you half the time and respected you for the other half. And she would have said, 'That woman has good bones,' and meant it as the highest possible compliment." Sophia's throat was doing something inconvenient. "She sounds extraordinary," she managed. She was. He looked away. She would want me to tell you that grief is not the same as loyalty. She would want me to be—" He stopped for the third time, and this stopping was different from the others. This one was the sound of a man arriving at the edge of something he had not stood at in a very long time, and looking down. Sophia waited. "I have been using her memory as a wall," he said quietly. as a reason to keep everything at a sufficient distance that nothing can get close enough to leave again. He said it plainly, without dramatizing it, the way he said everything, like confession was just another form of accuracy. That is not fair, to her memory or to you. The night moved around them. The roses breathed. Sophia sat very still. "Charles," she said. He looked at her. "I am not asking you to stop grieving her." Her voice came out softer than she intended it to. "I would never ask that. She was real, and you loved her, and that is not a wall. That is just something true about who you are." She held his gaze. "I'm only asking that you let it be true alongside other things, not instead of them." Something in his face broke open. Not visibly. He was too controlled for that, even now. But she could see it happening in the set of his jaw, in the way his eyes changed, in the long exhale that left him smaller for just a moment, and then steadier. "That," he said, "is going to require some practice." "Good thing you have time," she said. And something happened to his mouth that was, unmistakably, a smile. Not large, not practiced. The kind that happens when a person has spent long enough not smiling that they've forgotten what their own face does. And then it does it anyway, and surprises them. It surprised her, too. She looked away first, back at the white roses going formless in the dark. And beside her, she felt him, still and present and different from the man who had opened the door 11 days ago. Not a different person, the same person, one layer closer to the surface. "We should go in," she said. "We should," he agreed. Neither of them moved for a full minute. Then they went in, together, through the dark, back across the grounds toward the lighted windows of Blackwood Manor. And when they reached the door, he held it open for her, and she went through first, and neither of them said anything else, because nothing needed to be said yet. There would be time. 6 weeks of it, before a judge who was already predisposed against them, a cousin who had been calculating for 20 years, and a marriage that had started on a signed piece of paper in a house neither of them had expected to share. There would be time. And Sophia Blackwood, walking through her own front door in the warm Virginia night, was beginning, carefully, practically, with her eyes open all the way, to believe it. The 6 weeks moved fast and hard. Sophia had expected to spend them preparing documents. She had not expected to spend them learning exactly how deep Harlan Blackwood's reach went into this county, or how long he had been preparing for this particular fight, or how many people who smiled at Charles at dinner parties had already been quietly spoken to by his cousin's solicitor before the challenge was even filed. She found out about the first one on a Monday. Pemberton called Charles to his office, and Charles brought Sophia, and Pemberton sat across from them, with the expression of a man delivering bad weather. "There is a deposition," he said, "from a Mrs. Cartwright. She is a member of the church auxiliary and has given a sworn statement that she observed Mr. Blackwood in conversation with Mrs. Blackwood at the county store some weeks before the marriage was announced, and that the exchange appeared, in her words, transactional rather than social." Sophia stared at him. "I spoke to Charles exactly once before I came to this house. Once. In the street. For less than 2 minutes. About a separate business matter." Pemberton looked at her carefully. "Is there any possibility the exchange could have been interpreted—" "What Mrs. Cartwright observed," Sophia said flatly, "was a man asking a woman if she'd received a document his solicitor sent to her father's estate. That is a transactional exchange." Most exchanges are transactional if you are determined to see them that way. Charles leaned forward. "Can it be struck?" "It can be challenged," Pemberton said carefully, "but it will require a counter-deposition." Someone who can speak to the nature of your relationship and attest to its legitimacy. Its legitimacy, Sophia repeated. I am sorry for the language. Pemberton actually looked sorry. Harlan's team is building a portrait. Single incidents, small observations, nothing definitive on its own. But stacked together in front of Judge Hayes, they construct a narrative. He paused. We need to construct a different one. Charles looked at Sophia. She was already thinking. How many depositions can we file? As many as are relevant. Then we start this week. Mrs. Aldridge, Thomas, Ruth Daly, every member of the household staff who has seen us conduct this marriage as a functioning partnership. She turned to Charles. And I need you to think about who in this county has credibility with Hayes and isn't already in Harlan's pocket. One name, someone Hayes respects. Charles thought for a moment. Dr. Edmund Ray. He delivered Catherine. He's been the family physician for 30 years. Does he know you well? Well enough to have told me the truth when I needed to hear it, and not told me what I wanted to hear when that was easier. He paused. He came to see me twice in the year after Catherine died. He said he was checking my constitution. He was checking whether I was still standing. Call on him, Sophia said. This week. Tell him what's happening. Charles nodded. Pemberton looked between them with the expression of a man revising a previous assessment. I will begin the deposition process immediately, he said. Mrs. Aldridge's deposition took 40 minutes and required no preparation. The woman sat across from Pemberton's clerk with her hands folded on the table and delivered her account in the same direct, measured voice she used to run a kitchen. And what she described was a household that had been transformed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but methodically and genuinely, by the arrival of a woman who had walked in with nothing and proceeded to rebuild something. She sat down with those ledgers on the second morning, Mrs. Aldridge said, before she had even fully arranged her own room. She asked the right questions, which is harder than people think. And when she found something that was private to Mr. Blackwood and could have been used against him, she closed it and moved on. That is not a woman performing a marriage. That is a woman building one. Pemberton's clerk looked up from his notes. You have no reservations about the marriage's legitimacy. Mrs. Aldridge looked at him with the patience of a woman who has outlasted every fool she ever met. If you had watched those two sit in the same room for the past 5 weeks, she said, you would not be asking me that question. Ruth Daly's deposition was shorter and more pointed. She said 3 things that mattered. 1. That she had known Catherine Blackwood better than anyone in the household and would have resisted any replacement that did not honor that standard. 2. That what she had seen in Sophia Blackwood was not a replacement, but something separate and real. 3. That she had told Sophia directly, within the first week, that the marriage would be judged by this county, and Sophia had received that information without flinching and proceeded accordingly. A coerced woman doesn't set conditions, Ruth said. A coerced woman takes what's given and hopes for the best. What I watched Mrs. Blackwood do was negotiate. There is a difference, and it matters, and I will say it to any judge in this state. Pemberton read the transcript that evening and underlined that last line twice. The twist came on a Thursday, and it came from a direction Sophia hadn't seen. She was in the hall when Harlan arrived, unannounced, no letter, no card, just the man himself, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand and an expression she had not yet seen on him. Not the performed outrage of his first visit, something quieter and more dangerous. I want to speak to Mrs. Blackwood, he said. Thomas was at the door. He looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at Harlan. Alone, Harlan added. No, Sophia said. You'll speak to me where anyone can hear you." Something moved in his expression. Recalculation. Then he nodded. Thomas stepped back. Sophia did not move from where she was standing in the hall. Harlan Blackwood was a handsome man, in the way that certain kinds of meanness can look like character from a distance. He was 50, well-dressed, with Charles's same jaw, but none of Charles's stillness. He moved like a man always slightly ahead of himself. "I want to offer you a settlement," he said. Sophia said nothing. "The challenge goes away, all of it. File documents withdrawn, Hayes recused, the estate proceedings closed." He turned his hat in his hands once. "In exchange, you file for dissolution of the marriage on grounds of your choosing. I will ensure you receive a generous financial arrangement, more than enough to establish yourself independently, away from here." Sophia looked at him. "You're asking me to leave him," she said. "I'm asking you to take an opportunity." His voice was smooth and even. "You came here with nothing. You can leave with enough to build a real life. Your own life, not one borrowed from a dead woman's house." The hall was very quiet. "And what happens to Charles?" she said. "He loses the estate." Harlan said it without blinking. "He fails the will's terms. The property reverts. He will have income from other holdings. He will not be destitute." A pause, carefully measured.
But he will not have this.
Sophia looked at this man who had been calculating for 20 years, who had stood at his cousin's wife's grave and done arithmetic, who had waited with the patient, cold confidence of someone who believed that everyone had a price, and that all he had to do was find it. She said, "No." Harlan's expression didn't change. "You haven't heard the full amount." "It doesn't matter what the amount is." Her voice was level. "My answer is no." "Mrs. Blackwood, my answer is no," she said again. "And if you come to this house again without an invitation, I will have you removed." She held his gaze. "We are done, Mr. Blackwood. Thomas will show you out." Thomas, to his great credit, materialized at Harlan's elbow with the timing of a man who had been waiting for exactly this instruction. Harlan looked at Sophia for a long moment. Then he put his hat on and walked out. The door closed. Thomas looked at Sophia. "You all right, ma'am?" She exhaled. "Yes." She straightened her shoulders. "Where is Mr. Blackwood?" "Northfield, last I saw." "Send someone for him, please." She told Charles everything in the study, sitting across from each other the way they had that first afternoon with the ledgers, and she watched his face move through things he didn't have words for in real time. "He came here," Charles said. "Yes. He offered you money to leave." "A generous arrangement," he said. Charles stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and she could see every muscle in his back working to stay controlled. "Charles?" He turned. His face was doing something she hadn't seen before. Not the iron composure, not the careful distance. Something raw and unguarded and almost angry, but the anger was aimed inward. "He knew," Charles said. "He knew that you came here with nothing. He knew exactly what to offer you." "He thought he knew," Sophia said. "He was wrong. You could have taken it." His voice was very quiet. "You would have been... It would have been enough. You could have gone somewhere and built something without any of this." "Charles," she stood. "Stop." He stopped. "I said no," she said plainly. "Not for you, not from obligation, not because I couldn't imagine leaving. I said no because this is my home, and he had no right to walk into it and try to purchase it out from under me." She held his gaze. "And because what we are building here is real. It was real before I understood it was, and it is real now. And I will not let your cousin's cold arithmetic Reduce it to something negotiable. The rawness in his face didn't leave, but it changed, settled into something different, something she recognized, now, because she'd been watching it build for 5 weeks. In the kitchen, in the library, in the rose garden, across every table and every working morning, and every evening they'd sat in the same room, and slowly, carefully, without performing anything for anyone, become known to each other. "I don't deserve you," he said.
That's a useless thing to say. Her voice softened in spite of herself. I'm not a reward for good behavior, Charles. I'm your wife. The distinction matters.
He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, and he did something he had not done since the wedding. He took her hand, both of them, held them, not with drama, but with the focused, deliberate grip of a man who has decided something and is not walking it back. "Whatever happens at the hearing," he said, "I need you to know, regardless of the outcome, what you have done for this house. What you have done for me." His jaw was set, but his eyes were open all the way. "You walked in here with nothing, and you gave everything. And I have not said that out loud, and I should have." Sophia's throat was doing the inconvenient thing again.
You are not a man who says things out loud easily,
she said. "No." His hands tightened slightly on hers. "I am working on it." She looked at him, this man who had opened a door in the middle of desperation and offered her a contract and a room, and slowly, across 5 weeks of hard work and harder honesty, had become something she hadn't known she was building toward until she was already there. "Work faster," she said, and this time his smile came all the way. Dr. Ray came on a Friday and stayed for 2 hours. He was a small, sharp-eyed man of 60, with the unhurried manner of someone who had been the steadiest person in many rooms and knew it. He took tea with Sophia first, which she hadn't expected, and asked her 3 questions about the household accounts and 2 about the challenge, and listened to her answers with the focused attention of a physician assessing something serious. Then he looked at her and said, "You love him." Sophia set down her cup. "I beg your pardon?" "You don't have to confirm it," Ray said pleasantly. "I have been watching people for 60 years. It is there in the way you talk about him. Not sentimentally. You are not a sentimental woman, which is fortunate for both of you. But it is there." He picked up his own cup. "I will tell you something, Mrs. Blackwood, that I told Charles after Catherine died, and he refused to believe. The capacity to love someone deeply is not diminished by losing them. It is evidence of it. And a man who loved well once and lost it will love better the second time, if he survives the first." He looked at her over the rim. "He has survived. I wasn't entirely certain he would." Sophia sat very still. "He will give his deposition," Ray said. "And it will be honest, because I don't know how to be anything else, and neither does he." He set down his cup and stood. "I am glad he opened the door, Mrs. Blackwood." "So am I," she said, and found that she meant it completely. The hearing was set for a Tuesday. The night before, Sophia couldn't sleep. Not from fear. She had done everything that could be done, assembled every document, prepared every witness, built the clearest possible record of a marriage that had started from necessity and become, in the space of 6 weeks, something neither of them had planned for, and both of them had chosen anyway. She was sitting in the kitchen at midnight, with cold tea going warm in her hands, when she heard his footsteps. He came in, saw her, stopped. Then he crossed to the counter and put the kettle on the way she had that first morning, with the ease of a man whose habits she now knew. "You're not sleeping," he said. "Neither are you." He sat down across from her. The kitchen was quiet around them, the warm, settled quiet of a house that had been running well for weeks, a house that had found its rhythm again. "I keep thinking about what Ray said," she told him. Charles looked at her. "What did he say to you?" She hesitated. Then, "That the capacity to love someone is not diminished by losing them. That it's evidence of it." The word love sat between them in the kitchen air. Not awkward, just real. The way a thing feels when it's been true for a while and is only just being said out loud. Charles looked at her steadily. "He told me the same thing," he said, "when I was least prepared to hear it." "Are you prepared to hear it now?" He was quiet for a moment. "I have been prepared for the past 2 weeks, and waiting for the right moment. And I have decided there is no right moment, and I should simply say it." He met her eyes. "I love you, Sophia. Not from gratitude, not from habit. From knowing you, which is, I think, the only way it counts." The kitchen held its breath. "It counts," she said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, the way he had taken her hands in the study 3 days ago, deliberate and certain. "I love you," she said. "I did not expect to. I was quite specifically not planning on it." She held his gaze. "But you are the most honest man I have ever known, and you make room for me, and you do not pretend. And those things, it turns out, are sufficient." His hand turned under hers and held on. Outside, the Virginia summer breathed through the open window. Cricket sound and honeysuckle. The same thick dark that had pressed against her first night in this house when she was a desperate woman on the other side of 13 doors. She was not that woman anymore. Not because the difficulty had ended. Tomorrow there was a courthouse and a judge, and 20 years of Harlan's cold arithmetic waiting to be contested. Not because everything was resolved, or safe, or certain, but because she was sitting in her own kitchen at midnight, across from a man who had said, "I love you," the way he said everything, plainly, without ornamentation, like truth was the only language worth speaking. And she had said it back, and it was real. The kettle boiled. Charles got up and made the tea, and he put her cup in front of her first, and sat back down. And they sat together in the warm quiet and drank it, and didn't need to say anything else. Tomorrow would come. They would face it the way they'd faced everything in 6 weeks. Together, prepared, without apology, with the particular strength of 2 people who had chosen each other not from illusion, but from knowledge. And Sophia Blackwood, sitting in the kitchen her husband had walked her into on the night she arrived with nothing, looked across the table at the man she had not planned to love, and had loved anyway. And she was not afraid. The courthouse in Millhaven was the kind of building that had witnessed everything this county had ever done to itself, and kept a perfectly neutral face about all of it. Sophia walked through its front doors at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning, with Charles at her side, and Pemberton 1 step behind, and she felt the eyes before she saw them. Half the county had come. She hadn't expected that. She should have. Small places run on spectacle, and a challenge to the Blackwood estate was the finest spectacle this county had produced in a decade. But the rows of filled benches still landed with a physical weight she had to breathe through. Charles felt her pause. His hand found the small of her back, not possessively, just present. A single point of contact that said, "I am here, and I am not moving." She walked forward. They took their seats. Pemberton laid his documents on the table with the focused calm of a man who had done his preparation and knew it. Across the aisle, Harlan Blackwood sat beside a solicitor Sophia didn't recognize, young, sharp-dressed, with a particular hunger of someone trying to make a name. Harlan himself did not look at them. He looked at the judge's bench. Judge Alderman Hayes came in at 9. He was older than she'd expected. Heavy through the shoulders, with white hair and the deliberate movements of a man who had decided long ago that his pace was the pace everything else would match. He sat. He looked at his documents. He looked at the room. His eyes moved to Sophia. She met them without flinching. He looked away first, which told her nothing and everything. "We are here," Hayes said, "on the matter of Blackwood versus Blackwood, a challenge to the satisfaction of conditions under the late Edward Blackwood's will, filed by Harlan James Blackwood, concerning the marriage of Charles Edward Blackwood." He set down the paper. "Counsel for the challenger will present first."
Harlan's solicitor stood. He was good. Sophia granted him that. He was precise and quick, and he had arranged his pieces well. He presented the timeline as a sequence of convenient desperation. He presented Sophia's arrival at the estate as an act of financial extremity rather than free will. He cited Mrs. Cartwright's deposition, transactional rather than social, and let it sit. He cited 3 other depositions from county residents who had described the marriage announcement as sudden, surprising, and irregular. He did not raise his voice once. He didn't need to. When he sat down, Sophia kept her face still and her hands flat on the table and thought about every word Pemberton was about to say. Pemberton stood. He was not a dramatic man. He had never, in Sophia's observation, said a single word for effect alone. What he said in that courtroom, he said the same way he said everything. Plainly, building one fact on top of another. The way you build a wall, and a wall, done right, does not need decoration. He presented the document Sophia had written on her second night in the house. Her terms, her conditions, her protections, read aloud in full. He let the room hear what a coerced woman does not do. He presented Mrs. Aldridge's deposition, Ruth Daly's, Thomas's, the household accounts showing systematic, documented improvement across 6 weeks under Sophia's management. He presented Dr. Ray's deposition, and here the room shifted, because Edmund Ray's name carried weight in this county that could not be purchased or positioned. And what Ray had written was precise and unsparing and true. "I have known Charles Blackwood since his birth. I have attended this family through grief of a magnitude that would have unmade a lesser man. What I have observed in the past 6 weeks is not performance. It is restoration. Mrs. Blackwood has not replaced what was lost. She has built something new, and she has done it with her eyes open and her judgment intact. I would stake my 30 years in this county on the legitimacy of that marriage." The room was quiet when Pemberton finished reading it. Hayes made a note. Then Harlan's solicitor called his first witness, and the morning changed. The woman who took the stand was someone Sophia had never seen before. Middle-aged, nervous, with the look of someone who had been asked to do something she wasn't certain about and had talked herself into it. Her name was Clara Webb, and she testified that she had been employed briefly at Blackwood Manor 8 years prior, and that during her employment she had witnessed Charles Blackwood in a rage so severe it had caused her to leave the position. The room stirred. Charles's jaw went tight beside Sophia. "Can you describe what you witnessed?" the solicitor asked. "He struck the wall," Clara Webb said, "with his fist, in the hall outside the kitchen. It left a mark in the plaster." "And was this common behavior?" "I left after 3 weeks," she said. "I did not stay to find out." Pemberton was on his feet. "Objection! The witness's speculation about patterns of behavior she did not observe is not evidence." "Sustained," Hayes said. "But the damage was the damage. It was in the room now, settled into the air. Sophia could feel the rows behind her processing it, rearranging their understanding, and she could feel Charles beside her, doing the thing he always did when something hit him. Going very still, very controlled, the wall going up. She turned to him. "Look at me," she said quietly. He looked at her. She held his gaze, steady, unshaken. "I know who you are,"
she said, so low no one else heard it. So does everyone in this room who matters. His jaw loosened, just slightly. He nodded once. She turned back to the front. Pemberton cross-examined Clara Webb with 3 questions. When did it occur? What preceded it? Had she observed any injury to any person as a result? Clara Webb answered that she did not know what preceded it, and that no one had been hurt.
A man struck a wall with his fist during a period of what we know to have been significant personal difficulty, Pemberton said, not to her, but to the room, and caused no harm to any person. I have no further questions. Hayes made another note. The second witness was the one Sophia hadn't prepared for. He was a man named Gideon Cole. 50s, solid, with the bearing of someone who had once had more standing than he currently did. He had worked, he said, as a land surveyor for the county. He had surveyed the Blackwood northern acreage 7 years prior. Sophia frowned. She looked at Pemberton. Pemberton was frowning too. Harlan's solicitor asked Cole about the survey. Cole testified that during the survey he had discovered a boundary discrepancy on the northern edge of the Blackwood property, a section of approximately 40 acres that, when properly mapped, fell under the original deed of a neighboring estate rather than the Blackwood holdings. He testified that he had reported this discrepancy to the then estate manager, and that the report had been, his word, misfiled. He testified that Harlan Blackwood had brought this discrepancy to his attention 6 months ago. He testified that if the boundary was legally contested, the estate's total acreage would fall below the threshold specified in the will as the minimum qualifying holding. The room went absolutely still. Sophia turned to Pemberton. Is that true? I did not know about this, Pemberton said, very quietly, and his face had gone a color she hadn't seen on it before. She turned to Charles. Did you know? No. His voice was flat and absolutely certain. No. I have never been informed of any boundary discrepancy. Hayes was reading something his clerk had handed him. He looked up. Mr. Pemberton, were you aware of this survey? I was not, Your Honor. Pemberton stood. I would request an adjournment to review the survey records before this testimony proceeds. Hayes looked at him, looked at the solicitor across the aisle, looked at the clock. 1 hour, he said. We reconvene at noon. Pemberton got the survey records in 40 minutes because Sophia went with him to the county records office herself and did not accept delays. They stood over the documents at the clerk's table, Pemberton, Sophia, Charles, and she went through them with the same focused speed she'd brought to the household ledgers on her second morning in the house. She found it in 18 minutes. Here, she said. She put her finger on the entry. Pemberton leaned in. Then Charles. Then the county clerk, who hadn't been invited to lean in, but did it anyway. The survey report existed. Cole had filed it. But the response filed 3 months later, a counter-survey, conducted by a different surveyor using the original land grant documentation, had determined that Cole's initial reading was an error. The boundary was correct as originally registered. The counter-survey had been filed and signed and recorded by the estate manager at the time, whose name was Edward Blackwood. Charles's father had known about it, had commissioned the counter-survey, had resolved it, had filed the resolution with the county clerk's office 7 years ago, and apparently told no one because it was resolved and no longer a matter requiring discussion. Pemberton straightened slowly. Cole testified that the discrepancy was reported and misfiled. It wasn't misfiled, Sophia said. It was resolved and refiled. He either didn't know about the counter-survey, or he knew about it and said what he said anyway. The clerk was already pulling the counter-survey from the file. Charles looked at the document. Then he looked at Sophia. You found it. The accounts taught me how your father kept records, she said. Systematic.
Nothing discarded. Everything filed in sequence. She held his gaze. He was a thorough man. Something moved through Charles's face. Grief and pride, and something she recognized as the specific pain of loving someone who is gone and continuing to find evidence of them in unexpected places. Yes, he said quietly. He was. When they walked back into that courtroom at noon, the counter-survey was in Pemberton's hand. He presented it in 4 sentences, identified it, dated it, quoted the conclusion, set it on the judge's table. Harlan's solicitor asked for time to review it. Hayes gave him 10 minutes. Sophia watched Harlan across the aisle, watched the solicitor lean over and speak to him in a low, rapid voice, watched Harlan's expression move through things he couldn't fully control, the recalculation she had seen on his face since the beginning, but this time running up against something it couldn't calculate past. The 10 minutes ended. Hayes looked at both tables. Is there additional testimony relating to the boundary challenge? No, Your Honor, said Harlan's solicitor, and his voice had lost its morning precision. Then we proceed. Hayes folded his hands on the bench. I have reviewed the depositions submitted by both parties. I have heard testimony this morning. I am prepared to rule. The room didn't move. Sophia breathed. The challenge filed by Harlan James Blackwood rests on 2 contentions, Hayes said. First, that the marriage between Charles Blackwood and Sophia Wilder was contracted under circumstances that render it a marriage of convenience, rather than a genuine union, and therefore insufficient to satisfy the will's conditions. Second, that a boundary dispute reduces the estate below the minimum qualifying threshold. He paused. The second contention is resolved by documentary evidence submitted this afternoon. The counter-survey filed by the late Edward Blackwood establishes the boundary as correctly registered. This court finds no grounds for the boundary challenge. Harlan's solicitor wrote something on his papers. The first contention, Hayes continued, requires more careful consideration. He looked at his notes. This court has reviewed the document drafted by Mrs. Blackwood upon her second night in the Blackwood household. It has reviewed depositions from 6 witnesses with direct knowledge of the household's conduct over the past 6 weeks. It has reviewed a deposition from Dr. Edmund Ray, whose judgment this court has had occasion to rely upon for many years. He set down his papers. What this court has not found is evidence of a marriage contracted through coercion or fraud. What this court has found is evidence of a marriage contracted between 2 adults who established clear, negotiated terms, honored those terms, and built a functional partnership that multiple credible witnesses attest to as genuine. The room was absolutely still. The challenge is denied, Hayes said. The estate proceeds as registered under the will. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The sound that went through the room was not loud. It was the sound of a lot of people exhaling at once, and the scraping of benches, and the immediate, uncontrolled murmur of 30 people who had something to say about what they'd just witnessed. Sophia sat for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stood because she needed her feet under her again, the same way she'd needed them the night Charles offered the arrangement, and she had stood to make the decision fully. Charles stood beside her. He turned to her. He looked at her the way she had never seen anyone look at her in her 23 years on this earth. Like she was something real and specific and entirely irreplaceable. Not in the sentimental way, not in the way that makes a person feel observed, but in the way that makes a person feel known. Sophia, he said. Don't say thank you, she told him. I wasn't going to. He took her hand. I was going to say, you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known, and I would like to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. She looked at him. That, she said, is sufficient. Pemberton was at her other shoulder, shaking someone's hand. Mrs. Aldridge had somehow appeared from the rows behind them. She must have come to watch, must have sat in that courthouse the whole morning, and never said a word about it. And her expression was the most unguarded Sophia had ever seen on it. Not tears, just the particular openness of a woman who had hoped for something and was watching it come true. Across the aisle, Harlan Blackwood was already moving toward the door. He didn't look at either of them. His solicitor followed close behind, speaking low and fast. And then they were through the door and gone. And the 20 years of calculation that had followed Charles Blackwood's life like a shadow walked out with them. Ruth Daly was waiting on the steps. She had known, somehow, or she had simply decided to be there regardless of what happened, which was very like her. She stood with her hands folded and her eyes going from Sophia's face to Charles's and back again, reading what she needed to read in both of them. "Well," she said. "Denied," Sophia told her. Ruth Daly nodded once, slow and deep, like something settling into its right place. "Good," she said. "That's as it should be." She looked at Charles directly. "Your father would have been glad of her." Charles's voice, when it came, was measured, but only just. "I know." "So would Catherine," Ruth said. It landed gently, not as grief, as the thing grief becomes when enough time has passed and enough has been rebuilt. An acknowledgement, a completion. "I know that too," Charles said. Ruth looked at Sophia. "You'll do, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, which was exactly what she'd said in the cottage the first time they met, and it meant just as much the second time. "High praise," Sophia said. "From you." The corner of Ruth's mouth moved. "Don't push it." They drove back to the estate in the early afternoon. The fields were full of summer, high green and loud insects, and the particular exhausted gold of a Virginia afternoon that has decided to commit to itself fully. Sophia sat beside Charles in the carriage and felt the weight of the morning leaving her body in slow, deliberate stages. The way tension releases when you've been holding something too long and finally set it down. Charles was quiet, but it was the good kind of quiet. The kind she had learned over 6 weeks to distinguish from the closed, armored quiet of a man keeping everything at distance. This was the quiet of a man who had what he needed and didn't feel the requirement to fill it with words. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't comment on it. He simply turned his head and rested his cheek on the top of her head. And that was that. The carriage turned through the gate. The estate spread out in front of them. 400 acres of Blackwood land under the Virginia summer sun. And Sophia looked at it the way you look at something that belongs to you. Not with ownership, but with responsibility and belonging and the particular love that comes from work. From the daily, unglamorous, completely real act of choosing something over and over until it becomes yours. She had walked through that gate with nothing. She had knocked on that door until her hand bled. She had written her own terms in the dark and watched a stranger sign them, and decided, on the evidence of a few honest sentences, to trust that the man behind them was real. She had been right. That evening, after supper, after Mrs. Aldridge had declared the kitchen closed and retired with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has seen something through to its proper end, Sophia found herself in the rose garden again. The white roses were going dusky in the summer evening, half-color and fragrant. The garden settling into the long quiet of a day that had cost a great deal and paid it all back. Charles came without her having to call him, like he knew where she'd be. He sat beside her on the bench and didn't say anything for a moment, and then he said, "We should talk about what comes next." "The estate?" "The estate. The accounts. The northern field lease that needs to be renegotiated in the fall. A pause. And the room situation. She looked at him. The room situation. You have been in the East Wing for 6 weeks, he said, and his voice was steady, but there was something careful underneath it.
I would like to discuss the possibility of a different arrangement. A different arrangement, she repeated. Yes. He looked at her directly. No performance, no maneuvering. I would like my wife in my house in a manner that reflects what this marriage actually is, rather than what it started as. If that is agreeable to you. Sophia looked at this man, this private, difficult, honest, extraordinary man who had offered her a contract when she had nothing, and then had the grace to become something worth staying for. It is agreeable, she said. His hand found hers on the bench. She turned her palm up and held on. Good, he said, and his voice was soft in a way she was still learning, still tracing the edges of, still finding new rooms in. Around them the roses breathed, white and old and patient, planted by a woman who had known this garden needed something that wasn't timber or tobacco, and ripped out in grief, and replanted because some things cannot be left unmade even when they cost you something to restore. They sat there as the evening went full dark, and the Virginia summer hummed its steady hum around them, and inside the house the lights came on one by one, the way lights do in a house that is running well, in a house that has found its rhythm, in a house that has been, after 3 years of grief and 6 weeks of hard and honest work, returned to itself. Sophia Wilder had knocked on 13 doors with nothing left, and bleeding hands, and a spine straight enough to carry everything she had left. The 14th door had opened, and what stood behind it had not been rescue. It had been something better. A man who was real, a life she had built herself, and the love that had started as a signed piece of paper and grown into the most solid thing she had ever held. She had walked 7 miles to get here. She had earned every step. And Sophia Blackwood was home.